Content warning. Some viewers of this video may find the following footage extremely disturbing due to its very low quality. However, I must ask you to forgive me because most of this video has had to be recorded on a Spy Kids Spyglasses promotional toy from 2011 and transferred to my computer via unlicensed Bandicam. In the summer of 2018, I got an Lenovo Stormtrooper Armor kit in order to top all of my previous costumes that I'd made in the past. I got it, I cut it out, I glued it together, and I wore it to school. Just like that, for a full day of Halloween with no alterations. If you've ever worn Stormtrooper armor before, you might know why that's a bad idea. It was definitely worth it for how enjoyable the day was and how many people it made happy, but it was extremely painful. If you don't know, Stormtrooper armor just kinda tries to kill you. It's not very well designed for being on an actual person, and because of that, it can be very uncomfortable, very painful, and very hard to wear. The next year, I wore it again with no alterations other than just repairing it and preventing it from falling apart. And that was an even worse idea. I had to go home halfway through the day because of how sick I was, but that nausea was definitely exasperated by the constant irritation and pain that the armor was causing. The day wasn't a total waste, as I did get the best compliment I have ever gotten in my life, which I cannot repeat on YouTube, but I could definitely see that there was a problem that I needed to solve. Most people who wear Stormtrooper armor to events will just wear it for a small amount of time, never sit down, and just bear the pain. I am not most people, and I will not settle for temporary solutions. With this project I began in October of 2020, my goal is to make Stormtrooper armor so ergonomic and comfortable that you could wear it for an entire day to school with only mild discomfort, as well as be able to expand the range of motion immensely to be able to perform all the actions necessary to fight rebel scum and bring order to the galaxy. Don't follow along with these steps as I make numerous mistakes along the way, but come join me in my journey to make the infamous Stormtrooper costume a little bit more comfortable and safe. This is how the armor looks at the start of this project. Look at how oversized the thighs are, look at how nothing fits, and look at how generally uncomfortable absolutely everything is. This is what we're trying to fix in this project. I'm going to be modifying one part at a time so I can compare my fixed part to how it was previously to show the problems that it had before as well as how I fixed it. There's also those buttons that are missing that fell off. The first thing I'm gonna fix is the Stormtrooper Boots, which, if you didn't know, are actually just leather dress shoes, which is why Stormtroopers sound the way they do when they walk, as well as why they slide around all over the place in the original movies. The main problem with these is that the plastic shins on top of them and the sharp edges will grind away at the surface of the boot, making horrible noises as well as significantly reducing the lifespan of the leather shoes. While that is technically accurate to the original movies, I would like to fix it. My original temporary solution was simply to wrap white duct tape around the edges in an effort to soften them up and make them less sharp. As you can see, even the duct tape's been cut up, so this solution didn't really work. Instead, I lined the bottom of the shoe with foam board so that the only surface that the shoe would be touching would be the soft and smooth foam that lined the inner rim of the shin, and that way it could stop grinding away and rubbing away at the shoe with the plastic since it no longer touched it. And with the plastic no longer touching the shoe, it also completely prevented the squeaking and grinding noises when walking. Another issue the boots have is that if you're flexing or walking too much, the shin can actually ride up all the way to the top of the boot and then get caught on its lip and be unable to go back down. To prevent this, I had already installed a hook on a little string that would hook into the loop at the front of the boot to prevent the shin from riding all the way up and then potentially tripping you by getting caught on the boot. What I realized is the exact same thing can happen to the back of the boot, so in this round of adjustments, I also gave it an extra hook through another string to prevent it from riding up on the back, just as it's prevented from riding up on the front. The Velcro at the back of the shin that holds it together is somehow more strong in the Velcro portion than it is in the actual glue, so I attempted to replace it with magnets. I made a big mistake with that. I used a steel strip along the back to take up as little space as possible, and then I used some fairly weak magnets on the inside to hold it together. And that would have been fine if not for the fact that the force acting on the shin is your leg inside of it that's trying to expand it apart, and that is pulling the strip away from the magnets horizontally, and magnets aren't very good at dealing with that kind of force. They're more meant to just hold things together vertically. So I ended up having to revise it several times and adding more powerful magnets in between places, and then adding a small little bit of Velcro at the top to finally make it work. And it does work, and it works better than using Velcro on its own, and it is really convenient, but that took me a very long time to get finished and may have not really been worth it. I took off the sniper knee plate to reattach it later with a pivot so that I could also kneel on the left knee in addition to the right knee. I also repaired and reinforced the top parts of the shins that had been damaged with a little bit of plastic and some leftover foam board. Because the upper rim of the shin guard is meant to be there and has to stay, unlike a lot of the other rims that I would end up cutting out, I used bits of foam and cut up pieces of pool noodle to just line the inner edge of the top of the shin to prevent the calf and the shin from getting scraped and cut up by the armor. Now the trouble with the forearm piece is, numerous issues. One, these rims around here, that's what I'm going to refer to them as, are pretty sharp, and that's right in your wrist when it's on, and that's not very nice. It's feeling, to say the least, but also in A New Hope, they had no rim on the front and very, very little on the back, or just a little bit on the top. And then inside, we've got some cushions there, but it doesn't really, and it prevents movement side to side fairly well. It's not super well reinforced on the inside, but this is not providing padding for your, importantly, the joints in your elbow and also your wrist, which are very important, and obviously with this stabbing you is not very good. As you can see, it is way oversized for my arm. It's too wide in here. I only don't have room because of the rim. And I can't move my hand very much. It's very uncomfortable. So here's the left plate and the right plate next to each other. The right one is fixed. Just ignore the tape residue on it. I'm still working on it a little bit, so I'll clean it up later. But you can see the massive size difference between the left, which I put on my right arm for demonstration, but it fits the same on either. That's way too big, versus my right forearm that's perfectly fitted to me. And then on the inside, I've done quite a lot. Because I've had to cut it down, these covers weren't covered anymore, so I put some plastic there. You can only really see the seams when you're up close. And then around this rim, once it was my size, I put foam that I cut down all across the rim. That's just foam board like you use for a school project, but it's about half the thickness it would normally be. because I cut it down. And so now it fits my right arm much better. I'm not stabbing myself anymore. I've got some freedom of movement right here, and it looks great when you have the proper glove on. And then importantly, it really just sticks and forms to the body and feels really comfortable. I still made a lot of mistakes while fixing the forearms. As you can see on the right forearm is a mistake that I would make several times over the course of this project. I did not measure, so when I took apart the two pieces of the forearms and cut them down to make them less wide, when I put them back together again, the joins were not perfectly on either side of the forearm like they should be. I did end up fixing that on the left forearm where it's perfectly aligned, and luckily you can't tell too much from the outside, but you can clearly see how it should be and how it ended up being. This is the next piece I was having trouble with. This is the left bicep, and you can tell it's the left because it's got this lovely thumbprint in the mold from the originals, which I think makes it look cooler to just have that on the left, but that's funny that that's actually what it is. Like with the rest of the armor, the biceps rims are way too sharp and way too wide, and the biceps are also a bit too tall for me, so I'll be cutting them down to not dig into my armpit as much. Luckily, unlike the forearms, I'm not gonna have to cut the biceps apart and put them back together again to make them less wide. They already fit firmly enough on my body, I must say. And the unique challenge, however, with the biceps is that they can come together with the forearm piece and just pinch your skin together really tight. Cosplayers tend to call this armor bite and just live with this, but my main challenge is to prevent that from happening. And here's my right bicep to solve the issue. I've done a lot of things to it. I cut off a lot of material around the top of the bicep to make it fit my body better, and I've reinforced the inside with a narrow strip of foam board just to help it regain some of that structural integrity that it lost with that modification. The bottom rim is now completely absent and has been replaced by a bunch of different foam, which will be covered up by white fabric after the end of this project, so you can't see it from the outside, but that foam does serve a very important purpose. This foam configuration is my solution to armor bite. The foam pushes out the bicep right over the area where your arm folds so that it will actually slide over the forearm plate instead of pinching your skin in between. Notorious for always falling off, the hand plate. There's one main cause for this reputation, and it's the fact that the Velcro that connects the hand plate to the back of the glove is actually at a higher level than the rim of the plate. That means that the Velcro on the back of the glove is always stretching up to meet the Velcro on the inside of the hand plate. And because the Velcro isn't level with the rim, it's always trying to pull the Velcro apart. That's why it gets detached so easily. But how are you going to fix this? I hear no one asking because you already know the answer. You see, I cut down the rims. But not actually that much. I actually cut out a piece of foam board to be about the dimensions of the hand plate, and I just hot glued it in on the inside so that it would be level with the rims. This made it a lot sturdier, but more importantly, it made it so that the Velcro was perfectly flush with the back of the glove. Now, the handguard isn't constantly trying to peel itself away from the back of the glove, and I don't have plastic trying to constantly carve an irregular polygon into the back of my hand. Now, this piece by far was the piece I dreaded fixing the most. This thigh piece, well, both of them have a pretty negative history. As you might know, in the Anovos kit, and in most kits, the thighs are extremely oversized because you're supposed to cut them down to match your legs, because not many people have that thick of a thigh. But I didn't really know that, so I just kind of lived with the pain and put it together like that. And then in the emergency of I had to wear this to school senior year, we broke this apart and cut it down just a little bit to be able to wear it, and then used packing tape to fix it in place. And on the inside is all of these foam pads just kind of there to make it, a little bit tighter so it doesn't just fall down all the time and stress the Velcro. But at school, I had to rip foam out by the handful, and you can see some evidence of that just all over the place. So it was too tall, cut it to be a little bit thinner, but still way too thick, and it's just horrible all around. The main problem with the thigh armor is also the main reason I decided to start this project. The plastic digs into, cuts, and pinches the skin on the back of the knee and at the bottom of the thigh. By this point in the project, the foam that I added to the inside of the thigh plate was definitely a step in the right direction. However, at the time, it was a bit overboard, and I ended up having to cut much of it out because it was just making things worse. But enough about my successes. Let's talk about my failures. So right now, it's about into October of 2020, and I have made some fatal miscalculations in my attempts to fix the worst part of the Stormtrooper armor. I'd say the most grievous mistake that I made is just assuming by the look of how large the thigh pieces were that they were actually oversized. And they were somewhat, but I just kept looking at them and thinking that they were super massive and somehow getting self-conscious over that without realizing thighs are one of the biggest parts of the body. Thigh pieces will always look massive and strange when they're just sitting on the ground, and that's not a bad thing. But operating under the assumption that it was, I measured my thighs and then cut down the thigh plates to be as close to that measurement as possible with barely any extra slack accounted for. Because of that misjudgment, I only narrowly had enough length to even just be able to close the thighs back up again. And that unnecessary tightness would continue to cause me problems until the very end of the project. I also cut down the top of the thigh piece, which made it shorter and more ergonomic with a greater range of motion, but I didn't pay enough attention to how the top should look and interact with the cod piece and especially the butt plate, because I didn't nearly need to cut it down as much in the back, and it should have matched the shape of the butt plate since you can't bend your leg backwards anyway. That's not what's inhibiting movement. However, it's going to have to be up to you whether or not you want to follow this step of the process, because cutting down the thighs to make them shorter will greatly enhance your range of motion, but it can also compromise the looks and the accuracy of the Stormtrooper armor. I also opened up the thighs with Velcro to make it more convenient to get in and out of, but it turns out that's against 501st certification rules, and it also looks bad while not even being strong enough to hold the thighs together when it's so tight. Moving on, we are now at the shoulder bells, and we're into November of 2020. Yes, my original goal of finishing this by Halloween, when I started midway through October, was a tad unrealistic, and we did not meet that. The only thing I changed on the shoulder bells was I added a little ring of foam board on top of another layer of plastic on the inner rim, and that way it would interact with and hold the bicep plate in place without flapping around, and it significantly reduced the noise and reinforced the shoulder bell so it can handle recoil. We are back, and I have 100% completed the torso. This is as good as it gets. I'm not gonna have a side-by-side comparison because I only have the one torso, and each piece is unique. But we'll just start with the biggest change, and I'm sure many people have done this, but it's absolutely vital if you have to ever sit down in Stormtrooper armor, and that is that I've detached the front lower torso piece from the stomach, and that is extremely vital because then it can actually bend up when you sit down instead of normally it's just attached and then it, you know, you sit down, that touches the chair, it pushes it up, it pushes the chest piece up, it folds it back, and it cuts off your head, which is what I had to deal with for 2 Halloweens in a row at school. So I didn't think that'd be super fun to do again. So I cut that off, and luckily the belt actually perfectly covers that area. But that also just helps with mobility overall and helps bring it together a lot more by taking it apart. And that's by far the biggest ergonomic improvement you can make to the Stormtrooper armor, and this isn't unique to me. Probably many people have done this. Also, the biggest thing you can do is just fitting things. So I, when disconnecting that, I cut like a centimeter or 2 off of it, the total height, and then also right on the neck, the collar, I cut down a little bit as well. And I still haven't sanded any of this, but that's not actually been a problem yet. I will sand it eventually, but I've not needed to. And I have cut down the cod piece a lot as well, just making room for the thigh pieces. And on the inside, if you can see this, I just lined it with foam board so that none of the plastic actually cuts into your thighs there. If we move to the inside of the front torso, you'll see some modifications that I've made. First of all, there are 3 straps connecting the stomach to the cod piece. These are actually the thigh straps that I'd end up replacing at the end. But then here's a cushion piece. It came with the Anovos set to put wherever you wanted. And I put it there with some Velcro so that it actually pushes on the lower part to bring that more in, bring the center in so that it's the connection between the stomach and the chest isn't just super poofed out and looks ridiculous. It helps really even it out. And then up here, because I had, normally there's just those 2 pieces there, but I was running into the issue of this like coming over and clipping and being annoying. So to make some extra straps, I used those very common medical masks and just taped it here and then taped it over here, and it's very, very tight, very strong, and that stayed on there with just the tape really well. And because it's so tight, it still allows for movement, but it doesn't allow for the chest piece to actually get on top of the stomach piece with it all fitted correctly. Right here on the sides of the chest, just where your arm is, put some foam there so it's impossible to, you know, contact plastic with the inside of your shoulder like that, because that's pretty painful. Here's just a generic pad to keep the top of the chest away from your neck. And then there's foam all in here that is also preventing it from beheading you. And then I've also affixed some foam and hot glued it to the straps that are normally there on the Anovos set. And normally you can detach both of those ends, but I've just glued one of them in place so you can still adjust it and everything. But that one is really strong, and that allows the foam actually to be touching your shoulders instead of sharp plastic. So that's pretty good. The last thing on this side really is just some Velcro on top of the bridge pieces to really take it down instead of having them floating out there. And the connection here is still using straps. There are also magnets in here, which at the end of the project I regret not getting some small, extremely strong neodymium, but luckily these have worked, and they don't keep it together on their own, but in addition to the Velcro keeping it together, they keep it so that when it's on, there is no seam line between these two pieces, which is a big deal. That really helps the aesthetic. I added an extra plate on the inside with Velcro on it to more easily attach the stomach plate to the kidney plate, but the hot glue ended up being too weak, and I had to replace it with just normal Velcro strips. I just have one big cushion on the bottom of the butt plate, which keeps me really comfortable while sitting because it allows the butt plate to flex and also keeps me from having to sit on the rim. The single pad on the kidney plate both prevents the rims from touching me and keeps the kidney plate rounded by just pushing off of my back. Other than that, the rest of it is stock. To test all of the modifications put together, I ended up playing a game of Nerf in the full armor against some neighborhood friends, and the test was successful. For one, I won, because I'm the best, but for two, I discovered some important flaws with the armor. The Anovos kit attaches the thighs at the front just to the inner torso, which can drag down the entire torso piece as a whole, but more importantly, it also limits mobility by having the thighs sag in the back. I had a theory that if I could strap up the back of the thigh, that I could eliminate this mobility issue, so I tested it with a friend just by stapling some strips of Velcro together to try to hold up the back to a hidden belt on the inside. The tests were successful, but it needed some changes. Are you still filming?
Yes.
By far, the best improvement I've made to this armor is the way that I've attached the thighs. Normally, Stormtroopers wear a hidden belt underneath the armor that connects with a strap to the front of the thigh armor, but because it's only connected by the front, the back can actually significantly sag when raising your leg or running and cause it to cut into the back of your knee. This also, of course, limits your range of motion, so the way that I solved it was by attaching it with 3 straps instead of 1. I just used simple garter belts that I found on Amazon. I know, very sexy. Just one on the front, one on the side, and one on the back. That way the thigh would never sag in any particular direction and maintain its consistent height on my leg no matter how I moved around. I first attached the garter belts to the thighs using just a strip of foam board held in place by hot glue, but that very quickly fell apart, and I just replaced it with simple, reliable white duct tape. Be warned, if you're doing this yourself, make sure that you keep the rear strap off of your butt and just make sure to go around it. Otherwise, when you'll sit down, you'll actually break the strap because it'll stretch too much. In December, I messed around on Omegle in order to test my armor sitting down.
You will skip me right now.
I will skip you right now. In March, I finally peeled off the Velcro from the back of the thighs and glued them together as they should be. And then in April, I wore the Stormtrooper armor in the back of the half-track to help another YouTuber named MoreJSTU film a new video. And it was amazing that I actually fit into the turret, but it exposed some more problems and cracked open the back of the thighs, so I had to glue them back together again and use some extra foam board to reinforce them. Back when I wore the Stormtrooper armor to Halloween in school, I had to be extremely careful and slow going up and down stairs to make sure I didn't end up like this guy, but now, with all my upgrades, I can go up and down stairs in the full armor while not even moving any differently than I would normally without it. But the final, most important test of all is seeing if I can actually bend down and pick something up in this armor. Anyone who's ever worn this will tell you that it's impossible. But with these upgrades, it's barely an inconvenience. Costumes will always have to have some degree of compromise against ergonomics for the sake of immersion in the world of a story. Actors creating that story or cosplayers bringing it to the real world will always have to deal with some sort of discomfort for the sake of visuals. And Stormtrooper armor is by no means the worst cosplay armor that you can wear, but many of its worst issues can be fixed without seriously compromising looks or accuracy. People just grit their teeth and bear the pain because they've just accepted that it can't be changed. But I'm proving that you don't have to accept the status quo with any costume, and there's always some improvement that you can make that hasn't been thought of before that won't compromise how good it looks. Your experience matters, and not fixing ergonomic issues can not only hurt yourself, but can hurt the presentation as a whole. Where problems can be fixed, you have a duty to your body to fix them, and your body will thank you. Now get out there and make a change. Fix problems with costumes that have just been accepted for 40 years, and don't take toughen up for an answer.